The Bolian princess screamed in terror, abandoned in the cold void of space. Only the human soldier could hear her cries over the comm. Her fate hung by a thread. Explosions rocked the royal palace on planet Zorthax as the Korthak rebel forces stormed the gates. Alarms blared and panicked shouts filled the air. King Xanth rushed his daughter Princess Zara down a secret passage. "The escape pod. It's your only chance," Xanth said. Zara shook her head. "I won't run. My people need me." "You must survive." Xanth shoved her into the pod and slammed the launch button. The pod sealed shut and blasted off. Zara pounded on the viewport, watching in horror as Korthak troops swarmed the throne room. General Zorkath himself executed her father on the spot with a pulse rifle. The pod shook and warnings flashed. Korthak ships fired on her pod. The hull ruptured, venting atmosphere. "Mayday, Mayday," Zara broadcast on all frequencies as her vision dimmed. "This is Princess Zara of the Xanthari. I've been attacked. Life support failing. Request immediate assistance from any ships in range. Please help me." She slipped into unconsciousness as her pod drifted into deep space, helpless. Light years away, on the war-ravaged world of Arcturus IV, Sergeant Johnny Stevens ducked behind the twisted hull of a crashed dropship. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as the chittering horde of Kazark swarmed over the barren landscape. Their segmented carapaces glinted in the harsh sunlight, razor mandibles snapping. "Hold the line," Johnny barked into his comm, pulse rifle spitting blue energy at the insectoid warriors. His squad, battered and weary, formed a defensive perimeter around the wreckage. A blinding flare lit the smoke-choked sky. Johnny's head snapped up as an unfamiliar craft plummeted from the heavens, trailing flames. It smashed into the brittle earth 100 meters from their position. "Cover me!" Johnny vaulted over the twisted metal, sprinting for the downed vessel. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but curiosity overrode caution. The craft was small, barely large enough for a single occupant. Johnny pried open the crumpled hatch with his combat knife, revealing a limp blue form strapped into the pilot's seat. A female, her cobalt skin mottled with bruises and lacerations. Johnny froze. "A Bolian out here?" A shrill screech pierced the air. Johnny whirled as a pack of Kazark crested the rise, plasma rifles glowing with deadly charge. No time to wonder. He slung his rifle and grabbed the unconscious Bolian, dragging her from the wreckage. Searing plasma bolts scorched the earth at Johnny's heels as he ran, cradling the alien to his chest. His squad laid down covering fire, the chatter of pulse rifles filling the air. "Evacs here," Corporal Hawkins bellowed over the din. A troop transport hovered above the battlefield, ramp lowered. Johnny leapt aboard, his mysterious cargo clutched tight. As the transport lifted off, he stared down at the Bolian's battered face. Who was she? What twist of fate had brought her to this hell? The troop transport's engines whined as it settled into the landing bay of the Galactic Federation base on Arcturus IV. Johnny Stevens emerged from the craft, the unconscious Bolian princess cradled in his arms. Medics rushed forward with a hovering stretcher, carefully transferring the injured alien from Johnny's embrace. As the princess was whisked away to the medical bay, Johnny found himself pacing the sterile corridors, his mind awhirl with questions. Who was she? What had brought her to this war-torn corner of the galaxy? Inside the medical bay, Dr. Ethan Novak, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, tended to the Bolian's wounds. He cleaned the cuts and applied healing salves, his brow furrowed with concern. Hours ticked by, the base humming with the usual activity of a military installation. Johnny remained outside the medical bay, his pulse rifle slung over his shoulder, waiting for news. Suddenly a soft groan emanated from within the room. Johnny's head snapped up, his heart pounding. He entered cautiously, not wanting to startle the Bolian. Dr. Novak looked up from his patient, a small smile on his face. "She's regaining consciousness." The Bolian's yellow eyes fluttered open, wide with fear and confusion. She tried to sit up, but Dr. Novak placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy there," he said softly. "You're safe now." Johnny approached the bedside, his hands held up in a non-threatening gesture. "I'm Sergeant Johnny Stevens, Galactic Federation Marines. We found you in an escape pod on the battlefield." The Bolian's gaze darted between Johnny and Dr. Novak, her breathing rapid and shallow. Where am I?" "You're at a Federation base on Arcturus 4, Johnny replied. "Can you tell us who you are?" The Bolian swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I am Princess Zara of the Xanthari. My world, Zorthax, has fallen to the Korthak rebels. My father, the king, was executed before my eyes. He sacrificed himself to ensure my escape." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as she recounted the harrowing tale of her flight from Zorthax. Johnny listened intently, his heart aching for the young princess who had lost everything. "I promise you, Princess Zara," Johnny said, his voice filled with conviction, "we'll find a way to get you back home. The Federation will do everything in its power to help your people." Zara managed a weak smile, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Sergeant Stevens, Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the base, red lights flashing in the corridors. Johnny's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for his pulse rifle. "Orcs scouting party has been detected near the base perimeter," a voice crackled over the intercom. "All combat personnel, report to your stations." Johnny turned to Dr. Novak, his jaw set with determination. "Keep her safe, Doc. I've got to join my squad." With a final nod to Princess Zara, Johnny raced out of the medical bay, his boots pounding against the metal floor as he headed for the armory. Unbeknownst to Johnny and the rest of the base personnel, a sinister presence lurked in the shadows. A Xark infiltrator, its carapace blending seamlessly with the dark corridors, had managed to slip inside during the chaos of the princess's arrival. Its compound eyes glinted with malevolence as it stalked through the base, razor-sharp claws clicking against the floor. The infiltrator's mission was clear: locate and eliminate the Bolian princess. As it neared the medical bay, the infiltrator's antennae twitched, picking up the scent of its prey. It paused outside the door, its mandibles quivering with anticipation. Inside, Princess Zara lay on the medical bed, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the threshold. Dr. Novak, his back turned as he prepared a sedative, was equally unaware of the impending threat. The infiltrator's claws flexed, poised to strike. It had found its target and nothing would stand in its way. The Xark infiltrator crept through the shadowy corridors, its carapace blending seamlessly with the darkness. It paused outside the medical bay, compound eyes glinting with malevolent intent. Inside, Princess Zara lay defenseless, still recovering from her harrowing ordeal. Dr. Novak, unaware of the looming threat, stepped out of the room to retrieve supplies from a nearby storage closet. The infiltrator seized the opportunity, slipping through the doorway with a soft clicking of its razor-sharp claws against the sterile floor. Zara's eyes fluttered open, her senses still dulled by the sedatives coursing through her veins. A flicker of movement caught her attention, and she turned her head to see the Xark looming over her, its mandibles quivering with anticipation. Fear gripped Zara's heart as she tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat, weakened by her injuries. The infiltrator lunged forward, its claws wrapping around her neck in a vice-like grip. Zara gasped for air, her vision blurring as the Xark tightened its hold. Suddenly the door burst open, and Johnny charged into the room, his pulse rifle blazing with searing blue energy. The infiltrator hissed in pain as the plasma bolt scorched its exoskeleton, forcing it to release its grip on Zara. The Bolian princess slumped back onto the bed, coughing and gasping for breath as Johnny engaged the Xark in a deadly dance. They weaved through the confined space of the medical bay, trading blows and shots in a blur of motion. Zara, mustering what little strength she had left, reached for a scalpel on a nearby tray. As the infiltrator lunged at Johnny, she plunged the blade into one of its compound eyes with a sickening squelch. The Xark shrieked in agony, staggering back as viscous green fluid oozed from the wound. Johnny, seizing the moment, leveled his rifle and fired a single decisive shot. The plasma bolt tore through the infiltrator's head, blasting it clean off its shoulders in a spray of ichor and chitin. As the lifeless body of the Xarach crumpled to the floor, Johnny rushed to Zara's side, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. Dr. Novak, drawn by the commotion, burst into the room, his eyes widening at the scene of carnage before him. Johnny's heart pounded in his chest as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The presence of the Xarach infiltrator on the base could only mean one thing. Princess Zara was far from safe, and he would have to find a way to protect her at all costs. In the aftermath of the Xarach infiltrator's attack, Johnny and Zara huddled together in the medical bay, their hearts racing as they processed the gravity of the situation. Dr. Novak tended to Zara's wounds, his brow furrowed with concern as he applied healing salves to her bruised neck. "We can't stay here," Johnny said, his voice low and urgent. "The Xarach know you're on this base. They'll stop at nothing to get to you." Zara nodded, wincing as she sat up. "I have to return to Zorthax. It's the only way to end this war and save my people." Johnny's mind raced as he formulated a plan. "We'll have to move fast and stay under the radar. I can requisition a small ship, something that won't draw attention." Over the next few hours, Johnny and Zara worked tirelessly to prepare for their dangerous journey. They gathered supplies, studied star charts, and plotted a course that would take them through the least populated sectors of space. As they worked side by side, a bond began to form between them. They shared stories of their pasts, the battles they'd fought, and the losses they'd endured. Johnny spoke of his time in the Galactic Federation Marines, the comrades he'd lost, and the scars he carried, both physical and emotional. Zara recounted the fall of Zorthax, the betrayal of General Zorkath, and the weight of her father's sacrifice. In those quiet moments, they found solace in each other's presence, a flicker of light amidst the darkness that surrounded them. On the eve of their departure, alarms blared throughout the base. Johnny raced to the command center, his heart pounding as he took in the scene of chaos before him. Officers shouted orders, their faces pale with fear as they stared at the screens displaying the approaching threat. A massive Xarach fleet had descended upon Arcturus IV, their ships blotting out the stars like a swarm of locusts. The Galactic Federation forces scrambled to mount a defense, but they were woefully outnumbered and outgunned. Johnny sprinted back to the medical bay, his mind reeling. They had to leave now. He burst through the doors, startling Zara and Dr. Novak. "The Xarach are here," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to go now." Zara leapt to her feet, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. Dr. Novak pressed a medkit into her hands, his eyes filled with worry. "Be safe," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Johnny and Zara raced through the base, dodging panicked personnel and debris as explosions rocked the walls. They reached the hangar bay, where a small, nondescript spacecraft awaited them. As they climbed aboard, Johnny's hands flew over the controls, his heart racing as he powered up the engines. Zara strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat, her face set with determination. The ship lifted off, slipping through the chaos of the battle unnoticed. As they broke through the atmosphere, the true scale of the conflict became apparent. The Xarach fleet swarmed the planet like a plague, their ships raining down destruction upon the beleaguered Federation forces. Johnny punched in the coordinates for Zorthax, his jaw clenched as he navigated through the war-torn system. Suddenly, a new set of sensor readings caught his attention. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the screen. "Zara, look," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There, amidst the carnage, a Korthak fleet had emerged, engaging the Xarach in a vicious battle, and at the helm of the lead ship, the unmistakable figure of General Zorkath himself. Realization dawned on Johnny and Zara as they watched the two Bolian factions clash. The Korthak, in their relentless pursuit of Zara, had unwittingly stumbled upon the Xarach invasion. Now, in a twist of fate, they were forced to fight side by side against a common enemy. As they watched the battle unfold, a sense of hope flickered in Zara's heart. Perhaps in the face of this new threat, her people could find a way to put aside their differences and unite once more. But that hope was short-lived. A Kazakh destroyer, its sensors locking onto their tiny craft, opened fire. The ship shuddered as plasma blasts slammed into its shields, alarms blaring in the cockpit. Johnny gritted his teeth as he tried to evade the onslaught, but it was no use. The ship was critically damaged, its engines failing. He turned to Zara, his eyes filled with a grim resolve. "We're not going to make it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart, "but you still have a chance." With a swift motion, he pulled Zara close, his lips meeting hers in a desperate, searing kiss. For a moment the chaos of the battle faded away, and there was only the two of them, clinging to each other in the face of certain death. Then Johnny pulled away, his hand slamming down on the eject button. Zara's escape pod blasted free from the ship, hurtling away into the void of space. She watched, helpless, as Johnny turned the crippled craft towards the Kazakh destroyer, a final act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The two ships collided in a blinding explosion, the shockwave rocking Zara's escape pod. She screamed Johnny's name, tears streaming down her face as the realization of his sacrifice tore through her like a knife. But there was no time to mourn. With a heavy heart, Zara set a course for Zorthax, her resolve hardened by the memory of the brave human soldier who had given his life to save her. She would honor his sacrifice, no matter the cost. As the escape pod hurtled through the stars, Zara steeled herself for the challenges that lay ahead. She would return to her shattered kingdom, rally her people, and bring an end to the conflict that had torn her world apart. And she would do it all in the name of the man who had shown her the true meaning of courage and sacrifice, the man who had stolen her heart in the midst of a war-torn galaxy. Sergeant Johnny Stevens, the human soldier who had given everything to save a Bolian princess he barely knew. The escape pod shuddered as it entered Zorthax's atmosphere, the once lush planet, now a scarred battleground. Zara's heart ached as she took in the sight of her ravaged homeworld, the elegant spires of her father's palace reduced to rubble. But even amidst the destruction, a flicker of hope still burned within her. She would rebuild brick by brick until Zorthax was once again a shining beacon of peace and prosperity. And she would do it all with the memory of Johnny's sacrifice etched forever in her heart. Zara stepped out of the escape pod, her feet touching the scorched earth of her homeland for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on the ruins of her father's palace, a symbol of all that had been lost and all that could be reclaimed. The war was far from over, but with Johnny's courage as her guide, Zara knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, it was not the strength of armies or the might of fleets that would decide the fate of Zorthax, but the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. And as Zara took her first steps towards the palace, she knew that she would never forget the human who had shown her the true meaning of that spirit, the man who had given his life to save a world he had never known. Sergeant Johnny Stevens, the hero of Zorthax now and forever. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.